Hello, and welcome to Select and Start, the podcast about meaningful and memorable video games. I'm your host, Kiefer, and every episode I bring on a guest who selects a game that made an impact on their life. Today is a little bit different, though. I often spend time on the show talking about the video game industry because understanding the medium as an art form requires an understanding of the conditions under which video games are made. As such, I've often talked about advocating for the worker in a period of instability brought on by private equity, mergers and acquisitions, layoffs, mismanagement, and workplace abuse. We extend humanity and compassion to the people who need it because we relate to their pain, knowing it could just as easily happen to us, often by the same perpetrator. The Israeli government is committing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. They do this with the encouragement and material support provided by the government of my country, the United States of America, itself no stranger to violating international law. As an American citizen, my tax dollars are used to fund Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinians. Even though it is involuntary, it disgusts me and fills me with shame. I object to this genocide. I object to the illegal occupation of stolen land, and I object to the systems that allow both to happen. The American government supports Israel as a means of maintaining power and influence over the Middle East, and the close relationship between the two has proven lucrative for many American businesses who have found ways to profit directly from the genocide these governments are committing. One such company is Microsoft, who is currently partnering with the Israeli military, knowingly providing them with their products and services to accelerate the eradication of human life. Microsoft, the owners of the Xbox brand, Activision Blizzard, Bethesda, and so on, have been at the scene of many of the labor issues we've previously discussed on the show. They're not just a dangerous presence to the video game industry, but to the world. I refuse to associate myself with a company and brand eager to participate in genocide. But as an individual, I'm powerless to the military-industrial complex. What is to be done? It's clear that an organized movement is required to stop organized violence. But how do we achieve that? And that's what we're going to talk about today. And to help me talk about it and to provide some much-needed professional insight is someone who has written about video games, the ongoing genocide, and something called the BDS Movement. They're a writer and critic whose works have been published at Paste, Uppercut Crit, Unwinnable, and Aftermath. It is my honor to welcome Autumn Wright to the podcast. Autumn, how are you today?
I am doing okay, Kiefer. Thanks for having me on.
Happy to have you on. Any relation to the video game character Phoenix Wright?
Unfortunately, no. I could wish, though.
Yeah. That concludes today's video game conversation. Let's move on to the topic of today's episode, genocide. Autumn, you wrote an article for the independent video game site Aftermath. The piece, published on April 10th, 2025, was titled Games Media Can't Ignore BDS Xbox Boycott. And I found the piece very moving, beyond reporting on the fact that BDS is calling for a boycott on Microsoft. You just laid a lot of emotional feelings out there and made this really good. It was just a very cathartic piece. And I was moved by it, and then that's what prompted me to reach out to you to sort of help speak to this, because I think you spoke very eloquently there. And that's why I want to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, it was cathartic to write, and I'm really grateful to Aftermath and particularly my editor there, Riley McLeod, who's a wonderful editor and has done so much for games media behind the scenes for the past decade. Yeah, it was a piece I wanted to write because as it happened, I had fully formed thoughts about how I was going to respond to this, and I saw people either ignoring it or not really sure what to do with it, and I felt kind of responsible for laying the groundwork for this to be something that has to be contended with, and that the media just couldn't ignore by ignorance of not understanding the legitimacy of what a BDS boycott means materially.
Right. It is easy for us to be sort of caught up in this bubble of online where there are people that we follow who sort of focus on this kind of thing that mainstream media doesn't report on, or if they do, it's more gestured at than it is really spoken about. I have listened to podcasts that have spoken on this ongoing BDS boycott, and there is definitely this sense of what are you talking about sometimes when people who aren't in these online spaces hear about this thing. And me having this platform and understanding that not everybody is just plugged into these things, I wanted to use my platform to help raise awareness, because I think awareness is just the number one thing that keeps a boycott from growing and emerging. And if there's anything I can do on my end with my platform to do that, I'm happy to facilitate that.
Yeah, I was very surprised after the publication of the piece at how many like friends, colleagues just mentioned to me that they were unfamiliar with BDS. I really thought that it had gained more visibility in the past 2 years
Mm-hmm.
within especially online lefty spaces. So I was very surprised by that. But ultimately, that made me more happy that I wrote that, and also disappointed that there's been less conversation since then about it.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing I'm trying to reconcile. When there isn't much conversation around something, that doesn't necessarily mean that the world is apathetic to it, simply that this information is not being disseminated in the best way possible, right? People are not hearing. And when people are made aware, that's when change can happen. And this is an opportunity to talk about what BDS is. And the best way to do that is by reading directly from their website, bdsmovement.net. The links to every page I'm going to read from are in the description of this episode. So if you want to read more, please utilize these links as well as the other links I'm going to include in the description of this episode to help give you a fuller picture of what Microsoft has done and what needs to be done to properly oppose this. Reading from the BDS Movement website, quote, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions is a Palestinian-led movement for freedom, justice, and equality. BDS upholds the simple principle that Palestinians are entitled to the same rights as the rest of humanity. Israel is occupying and colonizing Palestinian land, discriminating against Palestinian citizens of Israel, and denying Palestinian refugees the right to return to their homes. Inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement, the BDS call urges action to pressure Israel to comply with international law. BDS is now a vibrant global movement made up of unions, academic associations, churches, and grassroots movements across the world. Since its launch in 2005, BDS has had a significant impact and is effectively challenging international support for Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. Since 1948, Israel has denied Palestinians their fundamental rights and has refused to comply with international law. The Palestinian BDS call urges nonviolent pressure on Israel until it complies with international law by meeting three demands. 1. Ending its occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the wall. 2. Recognizing the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. 3. Respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. BDS is an inclusive, anti-racist human rights movement that is opposed on principle to all forms of discrimination, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. I'm going to stop reading from the website for a second here. That's what BDS is, but how do they operate? Reading now from their Guide to BDS Boycott page, quote, BDS Boycott targets selection criteria. 1. Level of complicity, based on accurate, convincing research that proves complicity. 2. Intersectionality, cross-movement relevance of the target. 3. Brand recognition and media appeal, helps reach a wider audience. And 4. Potential for success. BDS operational principles, gradualness, incrementalism and building power to achieve the ultimate goals. Sustainability, sustaining victories and building on them to move forward. Context sensitivity, adapting tactics to suit the political cultural context optimally. End quotation. Which brings us now to the subject of today's episode. Reading now from their page on Microsoft, quote, Microsoft is perhaps the most complicit tech company in Israel's illegal apartheid regime and ongoing genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. Microsoft's complicity in Israel's apartheid and genocide is well documented, exposing its strong ties to the Israeli military, its collaboration with Israeli government ministries, and its involvement in the Israeli prison system, which is notorious for systematic torture and abuse of Palestinians. Microsoft knowingly provides Israel with technology, including artificial intelligence, AI, that is deployed to facilitate grave human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, including apartheid, as well as genocide. In light of the International Court of Justice's legally binding rulings to prevent Israel's plausible genocide in Gaza, as well as its July 19 advisory opinion affirming Israel's illegal occupation and apartheid system, Microsoft has failed its corporate obligation to prevent genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Microsoft, as well as its board of directors and executives, may face criminal liability for this complicity. Microsoft provides the Israeli military with Azure cloud and AI services that are crucial in empowering and accelerating Israel's genocidal war on 2.3 million Palestinians in the illegally occupied Gaza Strip. Microsoft's extensive ties with Israel's military are revealed in investigations by The Guardian, with the Israeli-Palestinian publication Plus 972 magazine demonstrating how the Israeli military turned to Microsoft to meet the technological demands of genocide. End quote. Those investigations by The Guardian and Plus 972 magazine are also linked in the description of this episode. Reading one last time from the BDS website, their page, Boycott Microsoft's Xbox, says the following, quote, "The BDS movement is calling for people to pressure Microsoft with divestment and exclusion from contracts whenever feasible. We also call for boycotting Microsoft's gaming products with the following options as tiers of engagement. 1. Cancel your Xbox Game Pass subscription. 2. Boycott Candy Crush, Minecraft, and Call of Duty, flagship video game franchises owned by Microsoft. 3. Boycott all Microsoft gaming products, including Xbox-branded consoles, headsets, accessories, and all games published by Microsoft-owned publishing labels such as Xbox Game Studios, Activision, Bethesda, and Blizzard. Microsoft Gaming, which includes Xbox consoles, Xbox Game Pass, Candy Crush, Call of Duty, Minecraft, and gaming accessories, make up a considerable portion of Microsoft's profit. By boycotting the Xbox brand, we're pressuring Microsoft to end its complicity in Israel's genocide, occupation, and apartheid against Palestinians. Palestinians call on everyone to boycott Microsoft's Xbox and Microsoft gaming products since viable gaming alternatives exist. Genocide is not a game. Pressure Microsoft to end its complicity in Israeli apartheid against all Palestinians and in its genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. Boycott Microsoft's Xbox now." End quote. And I wish we could end it there, but of course, this raises a lot of questions about engagement in the material world. It's one thing to read and understand, yes, Microsoft is bad. But how do we engage with that? And that's another thing I brought you on here to help sort of sort through.
Yeah, it immediately raises some questions about, for a person in games media, about how we are going to move forward with talking about Xbox games and products, the company. And I saw some conversation among mostly the indie press side of things in early April. But I guess with the piece I wrote for Aftermath, I wanted to really directly call in the larger games media apparatus into that conversation to engage with it and to legitimate the call for this boycott. Because if you are plugged into online game spaces, you've heard of calls for boycotts before. Sometimes it's boycott Twitch because they aren't supporting and are exploiting Black streamers on the platform. But sometimes it's random groups of people on the internet saying that we're not going to buy a game made by a transphobe, and that gets spun into a quote unquote boycott. Other times it's we don't like the multiplayer servers on this game, or there's pride flags on this game. So conservative subreddit is going to quote unquote boycott a game. And because the rhetorical well had been so poisoned about boycott, I think it was important to really spell out what a boycott even is, and how BDS works. I've seen a lot of people say, like, NVIDIA has contributed in some ways to Israel and its military. They've there are NVIDIA cards and technology in like certain Israeli computers. Why aren't we talking about that? And it's because Palestinians have not asked us to. And while there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, BDS strategically picks a handful of targets for us to engage with, to boycott, to maximize the pressure on those companies. And it's been very effective. It's a proven model based off anti-apartheid protests in the 80s in South Africa and around the world to pressure South Africa. But BDS itself, in its now 20-year history, has effectively gotten companies to divest from Israeli apartheid. And that's, corporations that primarily manufacture food, that is some tech companies, that is sports clothing companies. It proves effective when people engage with it. Games are such a way of avoiding
Mm-hmm.
things in the world.
Yes.
And the idea of talking about politics in and around games is so fraught
Mm-hmm.
that it was very obvious how this could be brushed off, avoided. It's hard to talk about. It's risky to talk about personally, professionally. People are very scared of saying the wrong things because they've been told if they say the wrong things, a mob is going to come after them, right? And they're scared that they're going to say the wrong thing because they're told it's complicated when it's not. And so I wanted to try to make it as clear as I could, I guess. As simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think you're hitting a lot of great points here. With video games, I mean, this is a thing, like just video games as a concept, their popularity emerges like during the Reagan administration, during the point where labor movements have been sort of crushed for the next several decades. So this world where video games are a known entity, in this world where there is like organized labor movements and organized movements in general, are just two foreign worlds, right? Or like the world of video games and the world of organization, just two separate entities. And when we talk about, like you say, boycotts in video games historically, it's just there's not really organization around that space. It's just loud discourse, loud noise.
Mm-hmm.
People who are cynical about the idea of boycotts in video games, they think of like the recent example pertaining to a certain J.K. Rowling IP, and then the outcome of that being, well, that was just noise on the internet. The reality is that game sold really, really, really well. And that's because the internet is certainly a place where people can learn information, but ultimately you do have to apply the things that you learn and the principles that you espouse into a real world environment. And reconciling your beliefs with your actions is something that all human beings struggle to do. But in critical moments where moral crises are happening, we need to do that. So beyond just stating your values, we do need to organize, not just do something individually, but be a part of a movement and be part of a vocal organization of people who are speaking up and standing up for values and peace and goodness in this world.
Mm-hmm.
But there is also confusion with that. People want to do the right thing, but some people don't really know in practice how to do things.
Yes.
People are afraid of retaliation, right? Beyond like, oh, being yelled at by the general mob of the internet. People who have these this place of media just do not want to be caught in the crossfire of doxing movements
Mm-hmm.
or attacked by bad faith actors who tend to target activists for pro-Palestinian movements.
Yeah. After the initial call to boycott, I saw, there's two discussions going on that I cared about. One was consumers, people who play games and who read, follow games media, had questions about, like, well, what should I do to adhere to this? And they were very semantical questions, I thought. And so I, wanted to lay out a little bit about not answer each of these individual questions, but say, how should you think about what a boycott even is to participate in it and do it effectively and to express solidarity? What even is solidarity, right? So I want to answer those people's questions. And then I also wanted to answer the question raised about what do we in games media that I am ostensibly a part of do about this, because there were no guidelines for this. There was no mandate to stop covering Microsoft, but covering Xbox published games does give them some amount of cultural cash and credibility and legitimacy
Right.
that I felt we could push back on. And based off how games media responded to Hogwarts Legacy's call for boycotts from a disorganized non-group of people on the internet years ago, I thought surely a legitimate body of Palestinian organizers around the world saying this thing that is doing material harm, like we are taking organized collective action against in this official capacity, surely that should garner a similar response from games media, right?
Right.
But instead, less than like 2 weeks later, the new Doom came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it was it was Oblivion, right? The Oblivion remaster, and then it was Doom, right? And it was just like immediately almost seemed like nothing had happened, right? Pretty much every publication was covering these games that were published by Microsoft, which are the targets of a consumer boycott. And most of them don't even mention that there is a consumer boycott going on, let alone the possibility that press should maybe also be acknowledging this boycott in some capacity.
Of course. There's a bottom line to protect, and journalism is a fraught industry. And that makes the conditions, these convenient capitalistic conditions where everybody needs to have money, and yet people who disseminate information are so valuable and yet they're underpaid. There's this pressure to sort of stay and fall in line with the mainstream view of things. And that's how power tends to stay in place. When the people who have things that they stand to lose, like their livelihood or their job or just any sense of control over their lives, are going up against these people who have lifetimes upon lifetimes upon lifetimes of security, it's difficult. And especially when everybody else is falling in line, you just have this herd mentality of like, well, everybody else is doing it, so I will just
Mm-hmm.
go along with this too. It's the normalization of these cruel conditions. And without that organization and that solidarity, and it has to come from not just the consumer, but it does also have to come with people of influence leveraging that influence in order to create the new mainstream narrative. We cannot just sit and watch Israel continue to commit war crimes until they do something bad enough that everybody's just like, okay, now nobody can possibly defend this, because that's not what is happening. The goalpost of what is acceptable just continues to move, and nobody wants to be the one to step forward and hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And we, as consumers, one of the most peaceful, nonviolent ways we can do that is just not give oxygen where oxygen is crucially needed. We do not need to fund the people who are funding and empowering a genocide.
Yeah. And I mean, like, to me, that is very simple. But then there is also the materiality I write about in the piece for Aftermath. I write about how if I have a copy editing gig that really pays my rent, and if I have to edit something that covers an Xbox game there, what am I supposed to do? Give up this job that's like the only primary source of income I've had for 2 years? Like,
Mm-hmm.
probably not. And I admit there that I would continue to copy out those things, but as a freelancer who writes like features and reviews and stuff, I'm not pitching that shit.
Right.
Like, that's very easy for me to say no to. And that's harder for some people who would be turning down a sizable check to write a review of the new Doom game or something, right? And I empathize with that. But I think something that has really troubled me in the past few months is that there's also just, a lot of people posting on Blue Sky about the Xbox published game that they're playing, and it's like no one's paying you to write a tweet, right? And that larger sense of apathy across the media sphere has been disheartening personally, and I think damning in a larger sense. I think the games media cannot really stand on its own two legs as an independent press if it ignores the BDS boycott, because either it is refusing to speak truth to power, or it must cow in line with what the publishers who can blacklist them and with what the purse strings that fund the websites want. And so either you have a press that doesn't actually care about genocide, or you have a press that isn't free. Pick one.
No, exactly. Since capital is tied into every aspect of the video game industry, access is one of the most valuable things that you can have if you want to cover a video game. This idea that if we have a good relationship, a good rapport with the publishers and the people that do control our actual access to games, if we are able to maintain a peaceful relationship with them, we continue to benefit from that relationship. It becomes less expensive to be a journalist or to be a press here, right?
Yeah.
But there comes a point, and especially with a company like Microsoft that is so unimaginably large, people generally aren't even aware of what the fuck they're doing. How could they possibly be funding it? Just you're saying like we have to stop playing Xbox games?
What did Xbox do to Palestine, right?
Yeah, what did Xbox do? And it's like Like, this is a company, Microsoft has over 200,000 employees, and they can just flippantly, like they casually every month they just lay off a billion of them. And that's a news story, and then people can criticize them for that. But suddenly this topic around, they have military contracts with Israel, and they are using generative AI to help them more effectively bomb and kill people. It's such a harrowing and horrifying thing, but we can't talk about that. But we can have conversations around, well, they canceled this video game.
Yeah.
Microsoft are bad because they canceled a video game.
Yeah. I mean, just this week before Microsoft's news, there was a story about how 11-bit game studio used AI assets in this game, the alters, that the company says were like there for in development purposes, and they forgot to be replaced, whatever. But there was outrage among this in like fan social media spaces. That was then covered by the game's media, right? And that coverage legitimizes this outrage.
Yeah.
Gamers upset online got more coverage from games media than the internationally known 20-year-old Palestinian-led organization resisting apartheid and the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Right. Like, there's a point where I stop accepting the whole like soft target versus like too big of a targets to challenge narrative, right? Because if we're allowed to criticize Microsoft on the merit of what they're doing to the video game industry, but we can't criticize them in the press on the merit of what they are doing to the world and how they are facilitating the deaths of children and just human beings in general to the tune of tens and tens of thousands, and that they have this enthusiastic relationship with the Israeli military, not just an acceptance of, they buy our products a lot and we like that. No, they sought these contracts out. As soon as October 7th happened, it is documented they immediately reached out to the Israeli military and said, hey, you guys need help with that? We would love to help you with that. Please give us money to help you. They are knowingly, enthusiastically profiting off of this human suffering. And we're not allowed to talk about that. But we can talk about how Perfect Dark is canceled now, and that doesn't affect their relationship with like getting access to games in the future. Microsoft's never going to release a video game ever fucking again at this rate. So don't even worry about the goddamn access. Let's just have some fucking principles.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, what's ridiculous is UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, published her own report of the 48 tech companies that are profiting and aiding Israel's genocide, and Microsoft is featured prominently there. She references the reporting that I also reference and that BDS references that shows how since October 7th, Microsoft has made a lot of money from surveilling Palestinians by offering the tech and cloud infrastructure that the IDF is using to do surveillance and stuff that we literally just don't know because they use air-gapped computers. And then, the next day, the news of all the layoffs comes off. That Microsoft is laying off 9,000 people. Large part of that is coming out of Xbox. Whole studios are being closed. Games that are years in development being canceled. People's careers being ruined, their livelihoods being thrown out. Not because the company and Xbox weren't profitable. They're actually extremely profitable right now. They're doing great. And that's actually why they have to do this, so that they can find some other way to reduce costs because of the exponential growth model of late capitalism that we live in.
Of course, the number must continue to go up, and this was one of the best quarters that they ever had from January to March. They made $26 billion in profit, not revenue. They made $26 billion in profit. Their stock is up, and immediately after that, they're like, okay, time to lay people off, because again, they have to appease the shareholders and maintain this exponential growth of value.
Yeah, so even if you care about video games, if you care about the devs, right? My friend Kyle Holtner, who runs the blog No Escape, wrote something like the day after the BDS boycott was announced, responding to the already emerging conversation, what about the developers? If you stand in solidarity with Palestinians by not buying a thing, then you are hurting game developers. As if the sale of a game has ever actually determined whether a studio remains open at Microsoft, right?
No.
ignoring everything about Palestine, if you care about games, it might be a reasonable idea to just stop giving Xbox money, because if they give them money, they also lay off whole divisions of their studios, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the past 2 days, right, I have already seen how, this does reignite some conversation about BDS. It makes it a little easier for people to swallow. They
Yeah.
did doing this. I'm seeing more people talk about it just in the past day because of this. However, that's because we're not talking about Oblivion's coming out. I'm so excited to play Oblivion. Oh, the new Doom. I gotta play the new Doom.
Right. They've had games coming out lately, right? When a game comes out and it's popular and people are talking about it, that's when we sort of normalize the existence of this apparatus, right? Well, yes, there's a boycott going on, but we have to cover Oblivion because it's an Elder Scrolls game. Of course, we have to. Streamers have to play it because our streamers feel obligated to play it because every other streamer is going to be playing it. And it's going to be a popular thing to watch, and I want my audience to be satisfied. And I need to worry about my bottom line. Journalists have to cover it because it's going to be a popular game, and it's going to be weird that every other website's going to have a big top article talking about the new Oblivion game and we don't. Yes, we need to make that listicle. Yes, we need to take advantage of the zeitgeist. Yes, yeah. And it's I there's a point where I like stop being sympathetic to that when you realize like if you just look around and talk to your neighbor and communicate with them that there is something that we can do about this, and you are the people assisting in writing the narrative, and we all have a role to play in that.
And you can say, well, I need the clicks from that big review for traffic this month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't fucking help Polygon when Vox sold them to Valnet and they gutted the whole fucking website.
Yeah.
Excuse my language, but the same thing is happening. The same cultural vandalism by execs who make millions of dollars every year is happening both in the game dev space and the games media space. And we have a lot in common as workers, it turns out.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the sense of the damage is done. Already, even as it becomes easier now to acknowledge BDS, to adhere to it, because fuck Xbox now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll take that. I'll take that if it helps the BDS cause. But I guess it's not surprising to a lot of people that it turns out Americans are really bad at standing on principles in lieu of something that is fun and titillating directly in front of them.
Yeah. And particularly with colonialism, like it's something where like America's governmental complicity in what is happening in Palestine are authorities over all of us and who determine our livelihood from a governmental standpoint, the legislators and the executive branches just normalizing and taking our tax dollars away to help fund this genocide. If those are if it's starting from there, of course, every other major corporation who also have these investments in this military apparatus, they're all going to fall in line too, especially because it's so lucrative for them. This is ultimately a money thing, right?
Yeah.
For the corporations. For America, it's about maintaining power and influence.
Yeah. And I need people, a common point that just smacks down the idea of even entertaining a boycott, as if there's not a history of these being successful actions already, is that, Microsoft's too big. Xbox itself is too big for us people who are enlightened to actually make any meaningful impact on. So I'm just going to completely ignore the idea of entertaining this, and I'm going to keep paying for Game Pass. And besides the fact that, there is the actual history of boycotts and BDS's boycotts in particular working, you can make the conditions culturally, the pressure on the brand image of what Microsoft is and does. You can use that pressure to weigh against the economic benefit of continuing to work with Israel, because they are not doing it out of any kindness or interest in Israel as a state or any propaganda about what they might do for Jewish people, right? They're doing this because it is profitable to the tunes of tens, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Precisely, yeah. Like this is the best opportunity we have to meaningfully make a difference in not just a video game space, but in a cultural space. Public opinion of Israel is at a low in my lifetime. People are generally aware it is now becoming more and more mainstream to speak out against the Israeli propaganda that happens in America, right? And it is now becoming more and more normal to be skeptical of leadership in general. And it's now more and more normal to be skeptical of the video game industry, right? We have all of these radical right wing movements that emerge because of art becoming a little bit more progressive, or this interactive medium challenging the player in little ways. But like when it comes to having principles in a left wing space, there's just no organization around that. Like rage and fury and anger are great for mob mentality, but operating out of a sense of general empathy, human kindness, that is harder and harder to build things around,
Yeah.
because the people who are aware of the material conditions and risks are so hyper aware of them that they freeze. It's like, I'm just one, and I make no difference one way or another. I can just remain passive in this environment.
Yeah.
And it's like, let's be a little bit more passive and just not give money to the power at the very least. That is what we are asking here.
Yeah. I mean, something guiding my writing of that piece, and that I am trying to expand to more of my work, is realizing that I had an orientation to what BDS is doing and how I should act, how I can interact with that. That was different from people asking others for, like, what are the exact things I can and cannot do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I came at it with like an ideological framework to apply to this action in this part of my life. And so I wanted to kind of lay that out in what I wrote for Aftermath. And I call it, like, it's basically like a manifesto at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, I think that is a thing that a lot of people who describe themselves as leftists but don't know if they're an anarchist or communist or whatever, and like that's a mimetic response at this point to say I'm a leftist. I don't know like what this just general. I like these things that are generally good for humans, etc.
Right.
There's that group of people who either because they just have not formed their own framework, or because they are very new to a thing that feels very risky to form an opinion on because of Israeli Hasbara.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was important to, I guess, share that framework. And for me, that comes from growing up in a very conservative place, being exposed to the Hasbara from a young age. I grew up in a very Jewish community that had, many synagogues. I went to, I basically grew up in a place where Jewish people were not a minority. So I was in and out of synagogues, for bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, other celebrations and events growing up. I was exposed to Israeli flags. Those conversations came up. And, I can remember in high school during one flare up of tensions between Hamas and Israel, before Palestine was like a word I knew, probably, just hearing that on the news, mentioning something to someone about it, and them telling me it's more complicated than that. They never talked about it again until after college, probably. And the
Mm-hmm.
college I went to had a relatively large Jewish community. I was friends with people who went on birthright trips. I was friends with people who really regret going on birthright trips now, right? I was exposed to all this stuff. And part of my motivation now to speak out against this is to rage against the own propaganda that was tried to shape me, and reject it alongside my Jewish friends and loved ones and community who are also doing that work.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the space that I can do that work in that seems very silent otherwise, I guess.
No, I mean, absolutely. The thing is, like, it is for you and for anybody, it is a risk to have values that are more than spoken, but you actually take the action to do it, right? I think because people don't really have a defined ideology, they have feelings, right? And I'm not hating on people who have not read theory, right? When I say this, I'm just saying, like, we are exposed to things, especially on the internet. You're just sort of shown things and you have a feeling about it. And then you're just able to scroll and then you're just moving on to the next thing. And there's no encouragement to pause and reflect on these things and learn from these things. We're disseminated information in places like Twitter or Blue Sky and Instagram and like snippets. And that's not really enough to sort of develop a full framework of ideology in an efficient manner.
Yeah.
If you're flipping through a slideshow about like, here's a bad thing that's happening. And like a flash in a pan, maybe you're energized for a moment, but you need something more in order to sustain that. And that's the issue with left-wing spaces, is like rage and fury and everything like that gets you a lap. It doesn't finish the race.
Yeah. And the events of October 7th put in full view what was happening in Palestine. The response since then has made it very clear to many people in America for the first time how Israel is operating in a apartheid regime and is now accelerated into ethnic cleansing in a very active sense. And a lot of people are then met with, it's complicated, the same way that I was. That's why we need to talk about it. Like when we say it's important to talk about, it's because people need to be able to be met with something that is not just going to turn them down and tell them not to feel that way. And, I felt this way. I remember one time on the school bus in elementary school in the same conservative town, seeing someone panhandling on the side of the road. It was probably like around 2008. And the neighbor who was sitting next to me on the bus ride to our elementary school was like, "Do you feel bad for that person?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, they probably just like do that. Like, basically said that they're probably just pretending, it was a fun news story in like the wealthy suburb, the panhandler who then drives away in their fancy car to go to their suburban house later that day. And living in America, I've realized, is, feeling some human amount of empathy to something wrong in the world and being told that you are wrong for feeling that way. And it takes a lot of unlearning and a lot of like critically learning the history of the world and how things are built up around us to then see how things are just constructed this way. What they keep telling us is natural was built, which means it can't be unbuilt and it can be built differently.
Right. For me, like the thing my family was caught up in was just Christianity, right? Especially this American non-denominational Christian movement that's popped up in recent decades, where it's even Christianity now doesn't even have an ideological framework anymore. It's just this like hodgepodge of just feeling and evangelical sense of like you're just appealing purely to emotion and not to logic or reason. It's just like this a form of escapism that has a sense of community around it, and the family unit embraces that. So I'm just like being like drip fed all these like conservative right wing thoughts. And it's like any point of questioning them is like, well, if you question that, you go to hell and you'll die and you burn forever if you even think about questioning that.
Yeah, and the version of that here is if you feel a reasonable amount of empathy for homeless people, it's gonna fucking drain you so much. I grew up in this suburb of South Florida. I lived in Central Florida for a bit after that. Now I live in Brooklyn, and it is still sometimes really freaking hard just to grapple with how apparent disparity is in front of me. And I can see how people retreat into apathy, into trying to make sense of the world in a way where they do not have to feel that emotional response. And I don't have sympathy for the people who then try to justify their position over these people and try to condemn people experiencing homelessness, do that.
Right.
But I think the conversation we are having can reach out to the people who are uncomfortable but don't really know what to do with that discomfort.
Absolutely. And like this, you're talking about, homelessness and the Palestinian people being completely ethnically cleansed. And ultimately, like the thing that we can reconcile between these two issues is that the thing that like the narrative always tries to shape around that to justify it is like, well, they may be victims, but they're not perfect. So therefore, this is justifiable to an extent, right? These people who have been given nothing their entire lives have had things taken away from them time after time again, and they have nothing, and they still find something to take away from them. And that makes you desperate. And you just want to live like any other human being would ever want to live. And you find a way to get something out of that. The retaliation you get from that is a further punishment. And that retaliation is justified because The laws are not fair. The rules are not fair. The law, in all of its fairness, bans both rich and poor men alike from living under a bridge. There is an underclass, this oppressed class that is oppressed for reasons that if we were privy to, we would be horrified by.
Yeah, I mean, that gets at, I mean, the underclass is what I think we are seeing come to light with ICE raids and the expansion of immigrant detention in America right now. It's not hard to notice, growing up in Florida, where there are immigrant farm working communities, living in New York City, where every delivery person is a brown person who does not speak a lot of English. I used to see that the exploited underclass of people who makes capitalism both able to be super profitable for capitalists while being affordable for us. The people who get cut out of that equation are currently immigrants, here legally or not. And that group of people has changed throughout history, right? That is why slave labor had to exist. Capitalism could not exist and be profitable for capitalists if we were not excluding certain people from the money being generated there, right? And that's shifted, and we just haven't really acknowledged in America how that has shifted to migrants.
Yeah, no, of course. You have the convenient target that the wealthy, the aristocrats of the world are able to point to as like the source of all your problems to distract from how they're the ones actually robbing you. It's like, oh, haven't you noticed that people who mess up your grocery order is this brown person, right? The person who delivered your food wrong, that's a brown person. The people that we have made the most vulnerable in this point in time, this no, don't look at us, the people who underpay you and exploit your labor and make you feel exhausted and tired all the time. Take it out on the people that you actually see every single day of your life. Don't take it out on the people that you rarely see, who have no interaction with the rest of society. No, we are your heroes. We're the people who gave you your job in the first place. Don't look at us. Look at the people who are messing up your everyday life because they forgot your straw or some fucking shit.
Yeah, we get mad at factory workers for not producing goods to the quality that they used to be, and not at the capitalists who are making more money than they ever have by selling us shitty things for less money, right?
Right. No, the reason Microsoft is worse isn't because like they have a whole business model built around generating shareholder value rather than having to produce materially decent products. No, the real problem is that they actually have H-1B workers. Oh, isn't that the scary boogeyman of labor? The foreigners that are taking your job that we can more cheaply pay to produce cheaper products. And it's like, because even people who are like slightly aware, that's like they try and take advantage of that too, right? It's like, oh, they want to make cheaper product, so we outsource that labor to somebody cheaper, and those are the real enemy. No, it's the people who are trying to ruin. This is just a really awful time because we're just exposed to these atrocities, and then the loudest voice gets to be the dominating, curator, right? Like there is no free press because the wealthiest people own the press. The Sinclair Broadcast Group is a publicly traded telecommunications conglomerate that owns or operates nearly 200 stations in the United States. They're the second largest TV station operator in the country, Nexstar Media Group being the largest. And Sinclair has a heavy, well-documented right-wing bias. There's less than 100 independent news stations in the United States. Newspapers are in decline, and social media owned by right-wing ghouls like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk is totally rewiring how information is disseminated and processed. With each passing day, there is less accountability, less credibility, and less freedom in the press because the wealthy, not the people, control it. No human being with that level of empathy would have that much wealth to be able to create something that would even remotely dream of competing with this reactionary right-wing news source. And we have to hold on to these independent news outlets that are actually trying to do some good into the world. But even then, there are real people who operate them that have a bottom line that need to worry about it. So the things that they're allowed to say still feel limited because they're worried about somebody coming after their family or their friends or, God forbid, themselves.
Yeah, we are in very deep now.
Yeah. So sort of like to centralize this conversation again, let's focus the conversation to be about the issue of today, right? There's this catharsis we can have about yelling about how bad the world is. What is something that we can do about what the BDS movement is asking us to do in this moment to get Microsoft to divest from the suffering that they're causing?
Yeah, fortunately, it is very easy to not buy a video game,
It
turns
is.
out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really it, right? If it is a game published by Xbox, don't buy it. Don't buy something on Xbox's marketplace if you have an Xbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft will take a cut of that.
Right.
Don't buy hardware, the accessories and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And people are inevitably going to ask follow-up questions, right?
Whoa, 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 whoa. We're just here to listen to people complain. We love the catharsis of complaining. You're asking me to do something now? Hold on. Okay.
It's so
Okay.
easy not to buy a video game, y'all. And like, I get maybe you are a person that bought an Xbox Series S and does not have another console, and like that kind of sucks, right? Like, no one's gonna tell on you if you buy a used video game and play it on your Xbox, right? Like, this
Right.
is not precluding you from the leisure activity that might be a great source of respite for you, right?
Mm-hmm. It's my distraction. I don't want to deal with the real world. You're asking me to deal with the real world. The only reason I engage with this hobby is as escapism.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to be generous here because there are people who definitely, like I myself, sometimes have used the escapism for periods of time. The problem with the modern video game industry is that it's made to maximize that amount of time. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when people say that video games are a good distraction, a respite from everything, I do believe that there is a point to respite from the horrors and atrocities and the work.
Mm-hmm.
But also, most video games are made to extract as much of your free time and expendable income as they can. They're made that way by massive corporations like
Yeah,
Microsoft, right?
absolutely. Like that's the thing about this art form being so new during the most like hyper capitalist era in human history is that yes, video games can be art, but their design and the way that they're able to be made is to be pop commercial product. And a lot of people take advantage of the form as another way of distracting you and taking money from you and just extracting as much value from you as a consumer instead of actually being something artfully made in conditions where if people were just able to prosper without worrying about a bottom line, this whole medium would be different, right?
Yeah.
We're not asking you to take up arms against the upper wealthy class. We're not asking you to take out the bourgeoisie today. Let's start from one, which is
Solidarity.
right now, there is a genocide happening. Human lives are being taken. And one of the biggest video game publishers on the planet has military contracts with the people committing genocide.
Military contracts that you can help pressure against continuing, right?
Right. This is not the first time Microsoft would divest from an apartheid movement. Historically, at like 1986, 1987, they left South Africa because apartheid became something they could no longer ignore. That the public sentiment on what was going on there pressured them to no longer engage with that until apartheid ended. And now something similar, even but on an even worse scale, is happening, and they're enthusiastically profiting off of it. And that pressure needs to be put on them on a public scale again. And BDS models itself after the boycott movements that were done during apartheid. Apartheid didn't end because everybody was just like hoping it would get better. People organized, and there were organized boycotts around that. And we're not asking you to boycott Xbox games forever. We're asking you to make a stand in this moment now. Stand up now. Make your voice loud as much as possible so they have no choice but to listen to you. There are people who are sacrificing themselves every single day to make their voices heard so that lives can be saved. We're not trying to say that you are a bad person because you like video games. No, we want you to know that there is a way that you can make the world a better place by making a sacrifice now and being as loud about that sacrifice as possible for the cause of a greater good.
Yeah, and I'm saying don't snuff out the guilt that you might feel that the thing that you have turned to for respite and fun that you have formed fond memories around has been implicated in this genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Be angry about that.
Yeah.
Do something with that feeling. Don't just accept it. Like, make that the motivation to take an action that will change something. And it's really hard that I've had to talk so much about that. Like, we have to get really fired up about boycott, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think, like, that is not what the moment needs. The moment really needs more direct action
Yes.
to actually physically stop what is happening, not just pressure an accomplice to stop profiting off of it. But that's where we're at right now. And if you want the genocide in Palestine to stop, and you are someone who has been playing and talking about and buying Xbox games, that's why it's happening, because you are still doing that.
Right. There are beliefs, and then there's acting on those beliefs. We're asking you to act on the belief that a better world is possible and that you can have a hand in that. And that's not just participating quietly in a boycott, right? A lot of people have principles and they're like, oh, I'll never go to McDonald's, or oh, I'll never personally go to Chick-fil-A because they support homophobia. But there's no massive organization around boycotting Chick-fil-A. So you're just one person boycotting Chick-fil-A and that's it. What if there was just a targeted movement of people all working together to put pressure vocally? It's not just passively not purchasing something, but making your voice heard. I'm not doing this. I am canceling my Game Pass subscription because of this, and I'm letting other people know about it. And those things that are happening, where thousands of people are getting laid off and games are getting canceled, that is not a separate issue from the genocide. It's not them doing two bad things. Those are bad decisions that are being made because the people at the top are happy to profit off of genocide, just do not care about their workers. If you are able to make money off of human suffering and to contribute to human suffering, you're going to bring that home. You're going to also say, yeah, I don't care about my employees. They're just here for my bottom line. I'm here to make money. I don't care how I make money. These are issues that are tied together. That generative AI that is being used to slaughter people, the people of Palestine who are not able to just live and breathe for a single goddamn moment, that generative AI is also being used to reduce the need for the workers that currently exist in that company. Their managers are now being told to evaluate employees based on their use of AI tools. Microsoft's internal policy is that AI is no longer optional and it's core to every role and every level. They're forcing their employees to build, train, and refine the very tools they intend to replace them with. And those same tools are currently being used to carry out a genocide, to kill people. This affects all of us. These things are tying into each other. It's not just a bunch of bad things happening. These are bad things that are being informed by the mindset of these people who just simply do not believe in humanity.
Yeah.
And to sort of like give clarification on what it means to boycott Xbox, let me ask you some questions as somebody who works in this professional space.
Sure.
No Game Pass, right?
That is like the number one point that BDS has laid out.
Right. Because they're asking for levels of engagement here, right? There are tiers of engagement. Tier 1, cancel your Game Pass subscription. Number 2, cancel the big value products, right? Boycott Candy Crush, because Microsoft owns Candy Crush.
Which is news to probably most people listening to this.
They own Minecraft. Boycott Minecraft. They own Call of Duty. Boycott Call of Duty. That is engagement tier number 2. Can we boycott Call of Duty?
Can we boycott the jingoistic national propaganda of Call of Duty that keeps glorifying Forever Wars?
Well, hold on, Autumn. They just added the American Dad skin. They're aware of the jingoism. They're self-aware.
I guess you can put a trans pride flag on an assault rifle in multiplayer.
Mm-hmm. Right. So they're good, and that means I can continue to play them, right?
I'm so tired.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I think the quote, I think Jacob, no, I think it was Blake Hester maybe wrote that Call of Duty's ontologically evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing redeeming about those games.
Tier 3, boycotting all Microsoft gaming products, which means beyond canceling your Xbox Game Pass subscription and boycotting the high hitters like Candy Crush, Minecraft, and Call of Duty, boycott buying Xbox branded consoles, headsets, accessories, and all games published by the Microsoft publishing label. So that's going to be Bethesda games. That's going to be the Blizzard games. That's going to be the stuff that falls under Xbox Game Studios, like the upcoming Outer Wilds 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 plus 4. Those games too. And I know it's a big ask to keep you, especially if you are a person who makes podcasts or a person who is a journalist or a person who is a writer or just a person who was really excited about one of those games, to ask you to not buy and play those games. But we're not asking you to never ever play a video game ever again. But the time for sacrifice is now, and it's going to be okay. There's so much stuff out there. Microsoft owns so much, but there is so much more that they do not own. I could dedicate my life to video gaming, and I would not be able to play all the games I currently want to play, not to mention the games that are going to come out. It's going to be all right. There's so much to play. It's going to be okay. There is so much to play, and this is a great opportunity to look at that backlog or to look at what else has come out this year besides the big AAA releases by Microsoft.
Yeah, honestly, having less things to choose from would help a lot of people right now.
Like you said earlier, do not buy games from the Microsoft store because Microsoft gets a 30% cut on digital game sales on Xbox, and they get a 12% cut from their games purchased on Windows. But there are, to make this less confusing for you, sometimes games are released multi-platform, right? Do we boycott games that are also released on the Xbox systems? Not necessarily, as long as you don't buy the Xbox version of it. You can still buy the Switch version of a multi-platform game that's not published by a Microsoft Xbox division. Like
a From Software game, right? Dark Souls, you can buy Dark Souls on the Microsoft store. That doesn't mean buying Dark Souls on Steam is in any way material supporting Microsoft, right?
Right.
Again, the semantics of it.
Right.
I think when you are asking these questions, you should step back and think about what you're doing. Are you standing in support and solidarity with Palestinians in this purchase decision? I guess that's the actual question to ask yourself. Don't send us follow-up questions about which specific thing, about whether KOTOR 2 is going to be, whether it's problematic now to buy it, right? That is not how to think about this.
Right. It's a question of, if you're doing this consciously, if you're being mindful of your purchases, this is going to be a bit complicated, right? The main thing is, look at the publisher. Is this publisher currently owned by Microsoft? If so,
don't buy the game.
Don't buy the game right now. And again, this is complicated because of the obfuscation of parent companies and divisions that confuses people to make it feel like there's more than a handful of actual companies that exist, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is also the consequence of the US allowing Microsoft to form a monopoly in the games industry, right?
Right.
Especially with the Activision purchase a few years ago.
Right. The fact that they own so many companies and the fact that we have to think and make these considerations so consciously is also an aberration. That is wrong. It is bad that they've done this. And that is another reason to justify not buying these games. And this whole thought in your head about but I wanted to support the actual developer. It doesn't mean I support the publisher that they're owned under. I'm sure those developers don't appreciate who their bosses are either, because of the layoffs, because they're being forced to use the tools that they don't want to use and may end up replacing them. And for countless other reasons, because Microsoft is an inhumane company internally and internationally.
Yeah, and as we said before, buying a game will not actually support those developers. That will not secure them a livelihood.
Never.
And we knew this. Microsoft has laid off hundreds of developers at a time in the past years.
Mm-hmm.
The whole studio's gutted.
Right.
Successful studios. The people who make Forza lost half their studio. Forza, come on.
Right. You were not supporting a developer. You were supporting a publisher that is ultimately owned by Microsoft. So there is no imaginary... I know the imaginary scenario in your head where people are paid fairly. If you want that world to exist, you cannot think, I have to support this developer now. Because that is not the material reality we live in. And we want to make this a better reality. And sometimes that means not buying a video game, actually. We cannot escape from reality to save the real world here. We're not asking, and even then, we are not asking you to stop video games cold turkey here. We're just asking you to be mindful about your purchases in this critical time and to be vocal when possible.
Yeah. And whatever better world it is that you specifically want to see that world come to life will require more sacrifice than not playing video games. It will require more risk than speaking out for Palestinians today.
Mm-hmm.
It will require more work than simply not buying something.
Mm-hmm. But not buying something is a great first step. Moments like this that test our principles and values, they challenge us. And it is always great to start with, what is the first step I can take, right? All right, easy first step. I can not participate in this aspect of capitalism, right? To borrow a quote from Disco Elysium, capital has the ability to subsume all critiques into itself. Even those who would critique capital end up reinforcing it instead. So this idea, right? This whole like no ethical consumption under capitalism, that was originally meant to make us horrified at the reality of the world that we're living in. The intention of the quote, no ethical consumption under capitalism, is the acknowledgement that we live in an unnatural system. Everything from the food that we eat to the clothes that we wear are because of some labor exploitation that happens at some point in the process, right? It is not an excuse to ignore the terrible conditions around us or to feel like we are powerless against it. This is a moment where we need to be more aware of the exploitation happening around us and the material consequences of them. And we start by being mindful about the choices that we make, because some choices still, even within capitalism, where every choice we make is horrifyingly built around exploitation, there are significantly better options in that system.
Yeah. I mean, no ethical consumption under capitalism means that is something that is supposed to horrify you. And
Mm-hmm.
instead, it has transformed into this excuse, kind
Yeah,
of, when you decide
absolutely.
to buy something off of Amazon that you have access to other ways, right?
Right.
Obviously, there's accessibility and economic factors at play in how and why you purchase the thing. But that's not what that quote's saying. The quote is a critique of capitalism that has itself been subsumed by capitalism
Exactly.
into justifying participating in capitalism. And it's ridiculous.
It's absurd. It is absurd. So let's take a step back. Okay, the system is bad. What can I do that's slightly better? Well, one of the major video game publishers is participating in a genocide. Let me not associate myself and my purchases with that at the very least, because that is the target of this moment.
Yeah, I would distinguish here. Buying an Xbox games does not actually support genocide, right? But the way that we were thinking about this, actively engaging in a boycott of Xbox does stand in solidarity with Palestinians, and it does pressure Microsoft to stop cooperating with perpetrators of genocide.
Great distinction there. And I know some of you might be listening to this thinking, why does this responsibility fall on me and not the people within the company? Many people have put themselves on the line within the company of Microsoft. No Azure for Apartheid is an organized group of current and former Microsoft employees calling for an end to their complicity in apartheid and genocide. Their demands include Microsoft terminating their contracts and partnerships, and to publicly disclose all their ties to the Israeli state, military, and tech industries. They demand a call for a ceasefire, and they demand protection for their Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, and allied employees from retaliation for their pro Palestinian speech, actions, and fundraising on internal company platforms. They refuse to be complicit despite the internal pressure and retaliation by Microsoft's leadership. Here are just a few ways internal employees have tried to put pressure on Microsoft. October 24th, 2024. Two Microsoft employees, Abdul Mohammed and Hossam Nasser, organized a lunchtime vigil for Palestinians killed in Gaza that had about 200 attendees. The two were fired in retaliation. Both are members of No Azure for Apartheid, and Nasser remains an organizer for the movement to this day. February 24th, 2025, which is a week after the Associated Press revealed that Israel uses Microsoft's Gen AI tech to select bombing targets. 5 employees were ejected from a town hall hosted by Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. As he was speaking, workers standing near him revealed t-shirts that, when standing side by side, spelled out, "Does our code kill kids, Satya?" April 4th, 2025. During a 50th anniversary event, Microsoft AI CEO Mustafa Suleyman had his speech interrupted by Ibtihal Abusad, an AI engineer who stood up and yelled, "You claim that you care for using AI for good, but Microsoft sells AI weapons to the Israeli military. 50,000 people have died, and Microsoft powers this genocide in our region." She would also call him a war profiteer. That same day, Vanya Agrawal would interrupt a talk between Satya Nadella, Steve Ballmer, and Bill Gates. She said, 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been murdered with Microsoft technology. How dare you? Shame on all of you for celebrating on their blood. Cut ties with Israel. Both employees were fired the following Monday. In May, the annual Microsoft Build Developer Conference was interrupted 3 times by protesters. On day 1, employee Joe Lopez and a fired Google employee disrupted the opening keynote, protesting Microsoft's cloud and AI military contracts with Israel. On the second day, Microsoft's head of core AI, Jay Parikh, was interrupted by a Palestinian tech worker who yelled, "Jay, my people are suffering. Cut ties. No Azure for Apartheid. Free Palestine." A third disruption was led by fired workers Vanya Agrawal and Hossam Nasser. They interrupted Microsoft's head of security for AI, Neta Habi, and head of responsible AI, Sarah Bird's talk. At one point, Hossam shouted, "Sarah, you are whitewashing the crimes of Microsoft in Palestine. How dare you talk about responsible AI when Microsoft is fueling the genocide in Palestine?" May 21st, 2025. Dropsite News reports that Microsoft quietly instituted a policy that blocks employee emails containing the words Palestine, Gaza, or genocide. The timing of the implementation came days after No Azure for Apartheid caused those repeated disruptions at the Microsoft Build Developers Conference. So, just a few examples of the ways that No Azure for Apartheid is fighting back and the ways Microsoft is being exposed for retaliating against those workers. But something else happened on May 21st. Brian Eno, who gets mentioned nearly every episode on the show, usually by me absolutely butchering a quote from him, posted an open letter to Microsoft called "Not in My Name." I will not read the letter in full, but I have posted a link in the episode description. The letter starts like this, quote, "In the mid-1990s, I was asked to compose a short piece of music for Microsoft's Windows 95 operating system. Millions, possibly even billions of people have since heard that short startup chime, which represented a gateway to a promising technological future. I gladly took on the project as a creative challenge and enjoyed the interaction with my contacts at the company. I never would have believed that the same company could one day be implicated in the machinery of oppression and war." End quote. He ends the letter with this, quote, "We now live in an age where corporations like Microsoft often command more influence than governments. I believe that with such a power comes an absolute ethical responsibility. Accordingly, I call on Microsoft to suspend all services that support any operations that contribute to violations of international law. My new startup chime is this: stand in solidarity with the brave Microsoft workers who have done something truly disruptive and refuse to stay silent. They risk their livelihoods for people who have lost and will continue to lose their lives. I invite artists, technologists, musicians, and all people of conscience to join me in this call. I also pledge that the fee I originally received for that Windows 95 chime will now go towards helping the victims of the attacks on Gaza. If a sound can signal a real change, then let it be this one." End quote. While not an internal employee, I bring up Brian Eno because he is using his celebrity and influence to apply outside pressure to Microsoft while also calling attention to the pressure being placed from inside. It is a commendable show of solidarity that also serves as an example of divestment from Microsoft. Applying pressure from the inside is important, but we also need to apply pressure from the outside. The people working from the inside have their livelihoods tied to Microsoft, and they are still doing what they can to put pressure on them because they know it's the right thing to do. And why shouldn't they protest? Even if you're a good, obedient, compliant employee, Microsoft will lay you off at the drop of a hat. What incentive is there for submission if it doesn't guarantee safety? From both inside and outside, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain by subverting power. If enough of us apply pressure, something will bend. As another example of this solidarity and pressure, I also want to shout out the developers and publishers of the indie game Tenderfoot Tactics, who pulled their game from Xbox in solidarity with the BDS movement. One of the game's developers, Botaru, spoke with Aftermath about the decision. As a resident of Seattle, he's fully aware of the size and scale of Microsoft as an entity and knows that pulling the game from the Xbox store won't take them down or end the genocide. Quote, "It's a huge part of the economy, especially in Seattle. It feels like everybody sort of works for Microsoft, or at least downstream from it. Microsoft is practically part of the state. It's so interconnected with the US military. Whether we're able to make Microsoft change or not directly, part of the point of targeting them is to be able to advocate around this and show these connections. Otherwise, nobody's interested in Azure Cloud. Nobody wants to talk about whatever Microsoft's bullshit AI is doing. These boycotts create opportunities for us to shine a light," end quote. He also adds, quote, "I know a lot of workers at Microsoft are very sad about this stuff, and it's hard for them to speak out and make any change. I think it's important to have this group of people outside applying pressure as well," end quotation. So thank you to Botaru, and thank you to all the folks over at Icewater Games who are leading by example by divesting from a corporation complicit in genocide. Now is a time for us to come together and stand in solidarity with those who act on their values and refuse to normalize and enable the war machine that threatens each and every one of us. And then there's also pressure that we can put on forces outside of Xbox during moments like this, right? To come back to an earlier conversation, we as individuals have this power to put pressure on people with stronger voices who can amplify issues to be more known, right? If there is an overriding sentiment, we can put pressure in meaningful ways and not just be loud, angry voices on the internet to let people know this is an issue of the moment. You have the power to address this. Why will you not address it? And that could mean media outlets. And as somebody who is a freelancer, Autumn, who would be the most useful people? You don't have to give specific names, but like, would an editor in chief be the person we send emails to? What would you do in these situations?
Oh man, that is a bigger question for sure. I do think, letters to the editor are a established way for readership to give voice. I think, along similar lines of a boycott, though, is stop giving publications that are perpetuating genocide your money.
Mm-hmm.
And there has been large calls within pro-Palestinian movements to stop reading, supporting through clicks, stop supporting through subscriptions, stop supporting through attention. Publications like the New York Times, and the Atlantic, and the Washington Post that have repeatedly published Israeli propaganda and have dehumanized Palestinians and their coverage.
Right, exactly. Be intentional. Do not mindlessly consume. We have this wonderful gift of consciousness. These feelings that we have when we react to horrible things happening, that is a gift as well. And we don't want to just suppress that and ignore that and bury our heads in the sand. This is a moment that requires intentionality. This consciousness, the choice that we make is a powerful one. I want to have the strength in this moment, and I want the effort that I make to be worth it. And that helps when you have other people use the strength that they have and join you. And the first step of that is making the very simple, easy sacrifice of mindfully not purchasing a new video game. I know that sounds crazy. I'm a video game podcast. I don't personally see it as much of a sacrifice when there is something even worse happening to people. I'm horrified by that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do anything within my power to enable that. Nothing in my life could ever possibly excuse that. There's nothing I could do that would silence the idea that I could be doing something in this moment. And even if that is making my podcast a little less funny or whatever, sure. But I want to use this voice, this little platform I have to encourage you to please make these considerations and use the power and voice that you have, whether that is just making a post on social media about why you're not buying Xbox in this moment, or making people aware of the BDS movement, or maybe you have a podcast and maybe you want to also publicize your feelings about this. Whatever that case is, I hope I got through to one person today, and I'm really appreciative of you, Autumn, for making the time to also make this appeal.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to expand on one thing that I
Absolutely.
had brought up earlier, which is that, the boycott itself is not enough. It is not the action
No.
that will transform the world. But the reason I say that is because we are not going to get to that better world if we do not have the conditions uh, to act on what
Right.
we believe in. The thing is, like, we are not going to get there unless we start acting in accordance with our principles and beliefs, right?
Exactly.
And like, we need, like, if we cannot do the minimum of standing in solidarity in a way that costs us no money, then we are not going to be in a material position to do any further action that actually improves the world, starts to change it that way.
There's never going to be a perfect opportunity to change the world. That power comes from within you. You actually have to model and like live your stated values. Your beliefs aren't just a rhetorical tool to be superior to somebody else. We're not going to create the perfect world unless you try and embody the world you want to be in.
Yeah, in small actions, you do transform the world immediately around you.
Right.
And I think that is so important. So it is, the language I use to talk about this. If I don't call this a genocide, then it is in the world around me. It is not genocide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we've finally gotten there where it's widely enough accepted that what's happening is genocide. But for, the first year of this thing, just calling it a genocide felt like some risky stake. But we did it. We repeated enough people repeated it enough that it is now widely understood and accepted as that.
Right. Nothing about the world that we live in that we enjoy was something that we got because we asked for it nicely. We had to fight for every single thing that we have now. And we're going to have to continue to fight to hang on to it. And we're going to have to fight even harder if we want more than what we have now. There's so many indignities that even the most privileged person experiences every single day. People who also suffer because of the actions of a few people at the top. The people who are dying right now in Gaza, you have way, way, way more in common with than Bill Gates and
Phil Spencer
and Matt Booty. You have way more in common with the people living in Gaza than you do with Matt Booty. You do not have to defend Matt Booty from the people who are incensed that there is a genocide happening and that Microsoft is party to it. You do not have to shelter him from that. We're in this together. And believe it or not, we're all victims of Microsoft in some way. Because Microsoft Teams fucking sucks. And also because they're destroying this industry that we love. The people who lose their jobs, those are people who are losing their livelihood. The other people who don't lose their jobs, they're also going to be worried, I might be on the chopping block next. They're making their own employees scared. This is just a horrible, horrible environment that they are cultivating all around. And because they make billions quarterly off of that in profit, they're totally fine with it. It is unimaginable greed that is destroying this world. And we need to make them reckon with that greed in some way. Take that first step. Take the next step. Take the next step. Even the BDS website gives you a tiered system of what you can do because they understand not everything is fought in a single day. You have to take a step, and then from that, you'd make the next move. And you're changing a little bit of yourself, and you're changing a little bit of the world in that process. We can't hide from the world. We all need each other and depend on each other. And that doesn't have to be an exploitative process. We can help each other, each and every one of us. And right now, there are people in Gaza who need our help. And I'm willing to do whatever I can within my power to do that. And that's all I have to say. Autumn, any other thoughts that you have about Microsoft or any ongoing Microsoft issues?
Following the mass layoffs of this week, it has never been easier to stop giving Microsoft money. There have never been more reasons to exercise your capitalistic consumer power to vote with your dollar against Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend people find the independent games media that has acknowledged the boycott and follow them to hear more about the industry. Those are people that are, doing more consistent labor reporting and also highlighting games made by smaller teams of marginalized people that are doing more interesting things with the medium than what is safe for years-long investments of corporations and investors, right? And so that is, aftermath, that is no escape, that is abnormal mapping, that is skybox, that is bullet points, that is unwinnable. You can find all those things on the internet, on social media, on podcast apps as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to learn more about about the history and the propaganda of Zionism, and you don't know where to start, and the 100-Year War in Palestine is a very dense book to you, which it is to me, and I have a history degree. I would really emphatically recommend Sim Kern's Genocide Bad, about how genocide is bad and how they keep getting away with it, basically. Sim Kern is a Jewish American anti-Zionist author. Genocide Bad is published by one of the only Arab-owned presses in the US, and it is based on a lot of Arab scholarship as well. Comes with a lot of endorsements, I'd say. Those are my recommendations going forward from here.
Something that is very simultaneously bleak and simultaneously reassuring to me is knowing that everything that has ever been done to the world in history has been done by mankind, human beings, the same person I am, the same thing that I am, the same thing my family is, the same thing that my friends are, the same thing that you are, listener. Indoor plumbing and the atom bomb were both invented by human beings. But the difference is the guiding principles of the people that made them. And we need more plumbers than we need atom bomb makers right now. And we need to get the shit out of the world. You do not need to have read Franz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth or read the works of anti-colonials to be a good person. But it is good to know the history. It is important to know that this is not an unprecedented time that we live in ultimately. There's just new names and new faces to the people who are suffering. And that means that change has happened, change for the good. There is an end to colonialism. People can fight and advocate for their beliefs. And it's important to know how and why they got there. But the differences between all those times is that you are living in this time. And we need to do what we can to help the people in this moment today. So know your history, because we need to learn from it if we want to make sure that we produce the change that we want to see in the world.
See how the world was built into what it is today so that you can know how to take it apart.
Be aware. It will help you if you do read things like Wretched of the Earth, right? It will help if you read Orientalism. It will help if you read about things, right? But we're not asking you to be a scholar. Just live with awareness, live with knowledge, and just refuse to put your head in the sand. Take an opportunity to listen and learn. I have a works cited page that will help you understand this moment a little bit in the description of this episode. It isn't comprehensive, but it will at least cover the things that we discussed today, as well as some of the issues going on in Microsoft as of this moment. It will outline the things going on for No Azure for Apartheid, and it is also going to document some information about BDS so that you can make the best informed decisions possible in this moment in time. Education and knowledge are the first things that you need in order to fight against this fucking nonsense in the world. And I really appreciate you for sticking through this episode and listening to it. So thank you for that. And Autumn, I thank you for being here. I'm going to have links to your works in the description of this episode. Is there anything else you want to shout out or anything else you want to discuss before I wrap this up here?
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for reaching out, having me on.
Of course.
It's cathartic to yell about this sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You can follow me, see when I post new writing at the Autumn Wright on Blue Sky. I'm also a columnist at Unwinnable, which is a monthly independent magazine publication of games and art criticism published by a great collection of various lefties in the games media. I write a column in there that is an interview series of games critics, and we talk about our industry, we talk about writing, and we also talk about the games that we're interested in. And we have some really, I think, thoughtful discussions that we don't get to have too many other places in games media. So yeah, give us a follow.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Select and Start. I would never ask anyone to do something I wouldn't do. So, of course, I'm going to stand in solidarity with the BDS movement. And since I'm making a podcast episode about it, it raises the question, how does this affect Select and Start? Not much. The boycott will not change the show's format. This is still a show about meaningful and memorable video games where I talk to guests about the games that made an impact on their lives. For now, we just won't talk about the games published by a company complicit in genocide and apartheid. It's an easy choice for me to make, both morally and practically. Microsoft is not a monopoly, as much as it wishes it was, and there is no shortage of impactful video games to cover. Furthermore, I'm fortunate enough to be part of a network that gives me total creative freedom. The wonderful folks here at the Moonshot Network have never given me a single note. I feel comfortable expressing my true, authentic views. Outside of complying with the demands of the boycott and refusing to promote Xbox, some actions I will be taking include notifying guests ahead of time that the show is standing in solidarity with BDS and asking them not to discuss games that fall under the boycott. I'm also going to make sure that if there are any mentions of Xbox or Microsoft, I'm going to balance it with mentions of their complicity in apartheid and genocide. As an example, I do my No Country for Old Games segment every episode where we talk about video game preservation and the present availability of the game that we're covering. If a game I am covering is available on Xbox consoles, I will acknowledge that the game is available, but also discourage purchasing it because of the ongoing BDS boycott. One such instance of this has occurred already with my episode on Deadly Premonition. Other than that, the show will more or less be the same. It takes very little effort for me and the podcast to stand in solidarity with the BDS movement. I understand that my choices alone won't change the world, but every choice I make has a consequence. And I'd rather those choices be in service of something noble than something selfish. And if my choices and actions inspire even a single person to boycott Microsoft, it will have been worth it. All right, I think that's it. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.